All right. So, yeah, welcome everyone to our Capstone Info Session Parents Edition. We had kind of a general session about 2 months ago, and this is a follow-up session to hear from a few Capstone alumni who were parents as they went through the program. So the whole goal here is to hear about their experience. How was their experience compared to folks who didn't have kids? How did they manage family life versus, expectations during Capstone, and all that good stuff. So my name is Nick Miller. We also have Max Hawkins. We're going to be your MCs today. We both run and administer the Capstone program. So we're kind of with all the Capstone participants from prepping for the program all the way through negotiating that job offer. With us, we have Elizabeth, Miles, Rodney, and Joachim, and I'm gonna turn it over to them to introduce themselves.
Hey, everybody. I'm Elizabeth Tackett. I am based outside of DC. My Capstone cohort was summer of 2021, and I have been at Stitch Fix since then. When I went through Capstone, my kids were, I think, 2 and 5 or 6. So I had a lot of questions or like concerns or fears about what it would be like to go through Capstone. So I'm happy to be here today.
Hi, everyone. Miles Abison, also happy to be here today. I'm from North Carolina, and I went through Capstone last summer. Started the job hunt in September and have been with BotKeeper since I think December I started. And my kids, when I went through the program, were 8 and 9.
My name is Rodney Matambo. Nick and Max basically forced me here against my will, or I signed up. But I was in Capstone in the January, February area of 2021. That's when it started. And my situation was I had a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old, and my wife was pregnant as I started Capstone. So plot twist.
Hi, I'm Yurim Choi. I was in the same Capstone cohort as Miles. And during the time that I was in Capstone, my kiddo was just about to turn 3. Yeah, and I also had a ton of questions about how to kind of juggle Capstone, while being a parent. So I'm really happy to be here to kind of share some of my experience too.
Awesome, thanks everyone. So I guess to kick it off, like before we even talk about Capstone, does anyone want to talk just briefly about like what core was like as a parent, just so we can have something to contrast Capstone with? Did you feel like your experience was, significantly different than somebody who's going through core without a kid, or anything you want to talk about your experience?
Yeah, sure. I can go first there. So for me, core, I don't feel like I felt as much difference from my peers in core, at least for me, largely because in core, the schedule was largely mine. Like I could dictate what my schedule was like. So if I had to go do something for kids, for family, I'd just be like, okay, I'll come back to it tomorrow. And so I could pace things on my own schedule. So it's my short version.
I think when I went through core, I had a lot less structure. I pretty much had my kids with me, or my oldest when I started, with me full time. And so I was like doing core during like nap time or late at night, and it was hard. And so of course for Capstone, I had to make arrangements, right? Had to be much more available, but it was great because I had then that structure and that dedicated time. So I actually really enjoyed the structure that Capstone provided.
I want to just tag off of that word structure because I really relate to that, both in core and then carrying on through Capstone. I was fortunate to be able to focus on core full time, and Elizabeth, my wife, was very supportive. We tried to treat it like a job, a full-time job, and so I kind of kept pretty regular schedule. But like Rodney said, there was this, anytime something actually came up, is like, oh, okay, you definitely are free to help intervene there, whereas Capstone was it was a little bit different. But
I think my experience, I think is the most different. I think I felt the most different from my group when I was doing Capstone because I was a parent. I think it was mainly because my group really enjoyed like synchronous time. So we did a lot of group work together. We did a lot of the homeworks together. And so I think I had to kind of deliberately say, okay, these are the things that are, deal breakers for me. Like, I really want to be involved in this. But then there are some things where I have to be like, okay, I have to step away at a certain point. And so I'm going to let go. And, sometimes I don't want to be a blocker. So sometimes I have to let my group make certain decisions on their own while they were meeting without me. And so those are things that I had to kind of juggle, as I was kind of transitioning into Capstone.
Yeah, and I think that's a good jumping off point there. So you talked a little bit about your experiences in core. Like broadly, how did things change as you moved into Capstone? I heard structure being one of the big changes as well. Can you talk a little bit more about the biggest differences between your Capstone working life and your core working life as a parent?
I can start off there. I think similar to Elizabeth, during core, what I did was I committed to every day doing something during core. I was working full time, but I also had a very flexible, like kind of remote work schedule. And so, I did it during lunch breaks. I did it like on weekends during like my son's nap time. But then when I transitioned to Capstone, I had to make sure that I had all this on block schedule, that I wasn't interrupted. And, that means, if my son was sick and was home, I had to figure out like what that schedule would look like and how I would commit to, my unblocked time when my son was home, because I couldn't really afford daycare plus like extra childcare during those emergency times, because I wasn't working anymore. So I think that was sort of for me the biggest thing that I needed to really work through and figure out with my partner. What are we going to do during those emergencies so that I can have those block time? The structure is good, that like we had that structure between lecture and group time, but because it was such an extended period, especially for me, because my group loved group time. So I had to make sure, I figured out some sort of plan to kind of have that for myself during those months.
Yeah, and for those who don't know, can you talk a little bit about like what that Capstone schedule is? And you mentioned kind of like individual time, group time. Can you elaborate on that for people who don't know about the schedule in Capstone?
Yeah. So my memory slips a little bit. I believe it was like from 10 Eastern time to like maybe 3 p.m. Eastern. We had like lectures in the beginning weeks. And then after that, we would have certain like problems to solve together as a group, or sometimes we would have things that we would learn and kind of put together notes together as a group that we would present the next day. These are like earlier in the Capstone weeks. For our group, we would take like maybe an hour break, and then we would reconvene after the lecture with everyone to kind of work on those problems and kind of put together those slides about what we learned from our reading and things like that. And then the later weeks in Capstone, it was more of like a project based. So our group kind of determined how we're going to structure our day. So our group had half the people in West Coast and half in East Coast. So we met around noontime, East Coast time. So I did some work in the morning, and then I kind of jumped off, when my son came home from daycare, and then, my group kind of continued on wherever they needed to, and then we would reconvene the next day. But we always had sort of like a several hour where all of us were together, and we would do stand-ups together and kind of work through any problems or blockers that we had.
Yeah. And for the rest of the folks, kind of the same question. Does that sort of resonate, or like what were kind of the biggest differences between moving from that core to that capstone schedule?
Yeah, so for me, I think one of the biggest differences was that I was working mostly in isolation in core, right? And then in capstone, I had like my partner and my family I had to think about, and obviously I could be much less flexible, but then also you have your team. And in my team's case, we were in like vastly different time zones. We had someone on the East Coast, West Coast, and then Hawaii. We had someone in Hawaii as well. And I actually think that was a little bit to my benefit, because I wasn't the only one who was like, my kid's daycare closes at 6. I gotta go. I can't just hang around. I think like my advice would be just to communicate as proactively as possible with your team members and your partner, if you have one, right, or whoever's helping you with your child or children. For me in particular, like, because I had to pick up my child pretty much as soon as I was done with group obligations at the end of the day, I would drop my kids off a little bit earlier in the morning, and I would do all the homework in the morning. I almost never could get to it in the evening, so I would just do it really early. And so you just gotta like maybe bend a little bit, be a little bit more flexible, but capstone is a pretty short window of time. So I found like maybe I was getting up a little bit earlier, or maybe I was cutting it close to daycare pickup during capstone, but that's a short amount of time. And I found it, of course, to be like totally worth it.
I'd like to probably chime in there and talk about like my transition. So one of the things, and it ties to what I think might be one of the core decisions you have to make as a parent going into capstone, which is you have to ahead of time decide what are like essentials and what are things that you can say I can live without for a short period of time. So for example, for me, every night I would, shower my kids, and then I would do like bedtime stories, this and that. And then on Thursday nights, I always have what I call guys' night with my oldest 2 boys, where we just spend 4 or 5 hours and we're gonna play, and I'm gonna tickle them, throw them on the couch, be civil, and then they attack me and things like that, right? And so for me, in a regular life schedule, that is a I'm not changing that for anything. But for capstone, I realized, okay, I can't just take a 5-hour chunk anymore, right? So what I did was I changed that to, okay, every night before you go to sleep, we're gonna play a game where I'm gonna chase you around and things like that. And it was like, okay, we took something that in regular life would have been, this is not changing, but it's okay, I can give that up for a short period of time. And one of the, like I keep saying, it's this core decision you have to make, because you have to now decide these are things that I can let go of in our day-to-day life for capstone, and then I will come back to them. And remember, they're temporary, because if you don't, you'll go through capstone and you'll feel guilty because you feel like, oh, my family, and then at the same time, oh, I'm not giving enough into my group. And that guilt trip, emotional struggle, if you don't address that ahead of time, you have to you'll face it, and it'll be reactionary instead of, I already know that this is temporary. So
quick follow-up for you, Rodney. Somebody asked, for how long did you have to give that up? Like, how long do you have to make that trade-off?
Well, that trade-off is primarily for the first 6 weeks. I think it's for when you're really doing like synchronous classes, everything is structured. typically after that, you have moments with your actual group where you can now decide your schedule more. And depending on your group, you may be able to come back to certain structures. But really, I would just say, assume for Capstone, there are certain things that I'm giving up for the whole time. Some things may come back later, but I shouldn't, like, once you get into it, you'll find that out. So hope that.
So I think you all kind of brought up a good point, like you're kind of having to negotiate a little bit with your team members, right? Usually on teams of 3 or 4, usually 4. What was it like working with other folks who didn't have the kind of like family responsibilities that you had? Did you have any like concerns about how much you're contributing or the kind of work that you're able to do?
Might not be the best person to speak to this because my group had another parent on there. Shout out to Tim Dronkers, Team Seymour. He went through core with me. He's got 2 young kids, and then we went through Capstone together. And so having that other person who understands exactly what it's like, I think was really beneficial to the team dynamic. So if you happen to have that, or even in some like the pre-Capstone phase as you're studying or maybe meeting some other people, if there are any other parents that you connect with, then that might be a resource. But that definitely helped to like balance out our team and set expectations.
I remember feeling very worried about this topic before Capstone. A lot of self-doubt, like I won't be able to keep up because of my family responsibilities. But I just found it not to be the case. I don't know, like maybe parents, I sometimes feel like other parents, I look at them and think, how do you get so much done in a day? Maybe we all have that superpower, but yeah, I found it to be totally manageable. There was one other mom of young children in my cohort, not on my team. Shout out to Catherine. She had a very young baby, and I just was like cheering her on the whole time. I feel like seeing other people with similar responsibilities succeed and achieve like the goals that you're also striving for is such a boost. So I think it's great to connect with other parents, like Miles said.
My group didn't have other parents, but I think somebody else mentioned this earlier. I really communicated early on. I think we like met a few times prior to actual start of Capstone, and I communicated, my obligations and that I have a little kid and that there may be days where, I may have like interruptions. So I was very transparent. But on top of that, I just always try to make sure that like, I was following up. I wanted to make sure like when we were dividing up workload that everyone felt that, the workload division was equal. I wanted to, make sure like, okay, does everyone feel okay that like I have to be leaving at this time, from this time forward this week. And I was just overly communicating just because, I wanted to be on the safer side when it came to, group dynamic, because there's a lot that will come up during Capstone, with group work, because you're working with 3 other people you possibly may have never met before and have never worked with before and may have different personalities and priorities from you. So I think over communication is super, super duper important.
Yeah, and to sort of continue along that line, you mentioned communication being kind of key to successfully working with the team. Were there any other like time management strategies that you used during Capstone? And like, have any of those continued to be useful during the rest of your career?
So,
yes.
Oh, sorry, Miles, go ahead.
Sorry, like if there's like one thing I wanted to talk about today, it's like, this is getting to it.
Your time.
Yeah, well, and then like Elizabeth, maybe when Elizabeth said structure earlier, it's like, oh, I jumped onto that because everything for me like underscores probably the most helpful thing was that time management. And even, I hear it like in what Rodney was saying, like, hey, these are things you give up, but these are things that I'm not going to ahead of time. And so what that looked like for me was the same in core, the same in capstone prep, the same in capstone, and the same now. And that's like a hard end time to the day. And so the beginning of the day is like, if I needed to get stuff done, then like Elizabeth said, I'd get up, I'd study, I'd get all my homework done ahead of time. But then right at the end of the day, which I usually didn't like, do any post studying, because my brain was like done by the time our group time or class time, whatever. And then it would just be a hard stop. There's always like something that could come up. And so every once in a while, maybe once every couple of weeks, there'd be something that's like, you know what, like I need to go a little bit further. But I think my family appreciated and was able to know that they could rely on me showing up at like consistent time at the end of the day, regardless of what had kind of happened earlier. And so that was, I think, huge for just keeping sanity, because me, the kids, my wife, everybody could kind of know, like, all right, we just got to make it to, whatever time.
The actually, like on top of that, one thing I would say is like I love the fact that like launch school kind of tricks you into something. And that is like in core, you get tricked into getting into the habit of disciplining yourself, right? And getting into like, okay, I'm setting my own schedule, right? And you're accountable to yourself, right? But when you get to Capstone, you're not only accountable to yourself, but the team, and you have different responsibilities. And one thing I noticed is that you're building habits, but now you're building habits communally, right? Like there are certain things that wouldn't have shown up in your own study because you wouldn't have seen the fact that, oh man, my stuff's not organized. Just because it makes sense to my mind doesn't mean it makes sense to everyone else's mind. So you like keep iterating through and you're like, okay, does this make sense? Does this make sense? And now you get to do this for like weeks and months, right? And by the time you like finish Capstone, you don't even realize, you're like, oh, I'm like an organized person now. This is the new me? Oh, okay, not bad. So like these kind of skills that translate onwards, like, and then when you get to the job, like they basically are now paying you to do what you were doing for free before, right? And so like now you can continue in these skills, but at a slower pace in a sense. So to me, that was one thing that translated, that there were certain group dynamic level skills that I developed in Capstone that when I get to the job, I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, I've been through this, slightly different, but we had to deal with things like this, and I can translate it to the job. So I find that valuable.
Then I give you all my highly technical, really advanced time management tip, which is this notebook that I always keep on my desk. I started this in Capstone, and every day, like I have a page that says like Wednesday, and I'll put just like my scheduled things, like it could be like Capstone lecture, group stand-up call, and then what I have to get done outside of like meetings. And I still do it every single day. And I know like it's a notebook that's like old school, but you can't like minimize this. It's not like a screen you can X out or minimize. And I fill it out at the end of every day for the next day, so that in the morning when I get on, there's no like catch up or like, kind of messing around. I know exactly what I need to do and I can immediately get started on it. I've already prioritized my day and I know what I'm going to do. And it was helpful during Capstone, of course, and I'm never going to stop doing it.
I absolutely love that, actually. So I think my strategy, something that I try to keep in mind, not so much time management strategy per se, but always just trying to be like fully committed to where I am in that time block. I think it's really important for me. I have another friend who's also a working mom, and she mentioned to me once, like, I just feel like when I'm at work or when I'm at home, I'm not ever fully anywhere, and she just never felt so present, and so she didn't feel very productive anywhere she was. And so like, I always talk about with my friends how important it is that, like, okay, if this is your capstone or if this is your work block, like, you're just committed to this. I can't be thinking about all the things that I haven't done somewhere else. And then when I close my laptop and I'm home with my kiddos, and with my family, like, I have to be just fully present there, and I can't be thinking about, like, the things that I have, to do. And I think this is really important during capstone, because capstone is really like all encompassing. Like, there's so much information that you still have to like digest and understand, and there's going to be so much more that you won't be able to get to. But I think it's really important to have that discipline to be like, okay, I'm stepping away and not thinking about this for the time block that I'm away from this. So for me, that was very important thing that I need to continually like work on and exercise.
Nice. Thanks, everyone. Yeah, I think like the time management strategies, especially when you have kids and you have to kind of juggle that at the same time, it becomes even more important. Like having a routine, having structure, having something that you do every day is just going to help keep everything straight, right? And give you kind of the breathing room with which to kind of like do the things that you need to do. So I think now we're about halfway through the session. We're going to start moving on to the Q&A questions. The first one here is specifically directed to Rodney. Based on your experience, would you recommend going through Capstone while your partner is pregnant or after?
That is tough in two different ways. And I'm gonna give a very engineering answer, and it depends. And the idea, I'd say, is like before, right? While like I had that option and I chose before, and my reasoning was, I knew we were going to move for Capstone and Core, we were going to move to Puerto Rico, where there was going to be a community, like her parents, and we would have more support, right? And so I felt like, okay, then for all of our kids, I had been to every appointment, but at this point I was going to have to miss some. And I thought, well, it's probably better for me if I miss certain of the appointments, then after the baby is born, maybe, can stay up at night, help more and things like that. And that was my like walking through it. And so that was what made sense for us, right? On the other hand, right, like perhaps in someone else's situation, it might be different, where it's like, okay, afterwards, there's gonna be more support. There's gonna be like, we can structure it this way, or it's a better situation or whatever. Maybe that's your situation. It wasn't mine. So those were my decisions based on like, I just created a value system based on what I thought would be a better trade-off. So for you, I would just say, think in the same sense, and then what are you willing to say, okay, we can let go of this because I know where we're trying to go. So hopefully that helps.
Before we move on, any other thoughts about that? Cool. So in terms of our next question, clear ongoing communication with your partner is really important. How did you approach the topic with your partner, just to set a mutual understanding and expectations around, daily life and childcare and marriage? Do you have any advice or any perspectives there?
Start by giving a massage.
I felt like Launch School did a great job with communication with us ahead of time. And so that translated to early conversations of, well, this is what it would like. Could we handle this for, like you're saying, Elizabeth, it's a set time. And so, okay, can we handle this for that long? And so I would just lean into the stuff that they say, they're telling you. Even during the sessions, I remember like the surgeon would be like, hey, don't study. Like once you hit here, just be done. And he was getting at what I think you were saying, you're just not going to get it all. You just during core, oh, I'm struggling with this concept. I can slow down a little bit. I can hit this again tomorrow. Like you can't in Capstone. It just rolls on to the next day, the next topic, the next thing. And so you have to be okay with kind of letting it go. And so leaning on the advice of the instructors to do that, and then just communicating that with my wife. And that kind of became this feedback thing where when I started to veer off a little bit of like, oh, well, maybe I'll study this because I'm really struggling with this topic, like all of them, she would help steer, well, are you sure? And so she was kind of a help to kind of push back. Just a side note, the only communication from launch school that I felt maybe I missed a little bit was the preparatory phase for Capstone. I think I remember thinking like, oh, it'll be we'll have much more time. We can get a lot of family time in before we hit the ground, like on day one of Capstone. And there was a lot of preparation. And I'm grateful that my wife gave me the time to kind of adjust and fit in to getting all that done. We did take like I think 5 days off, like right before the start, and that was really helpful just for the family. But that was the only thing that I think differed from the good communication that launch school gave us, and then translating that into conversations with my wife. That was like a little bit of a miss for us, but it all worked out.
I like to think that both you and your spouse, partner, are both going through Capstone, in a sense, because no matter how much I feel like you try to communicate it ahead of time, like once you're in it, you kind of just see that our dynamic may have to change a little bit, right, for a short period of time. And so for me, it's really important to get buy-in ahead of time, to basically talk together and just say like, look, this is what I think it's going to be like. This is what they've communicated to me. And I am just going to say, what do you think about it? What do you like? We're going to go through this together, try our best, and figure out things as we go along. Because I think especially as parents, like when you start seeing it, you can get paralyzed trying to be like, okay, we're going to plan for this, and this, and then this situation. And then a curveball comes along and like, we didn't plan for this. And it can cause a tension in your relationship. So it's better just to talk ahead of time. Like, look, not everything that comes our way will have expected perfectly, and we'll have to work through it together. So
I think that Rodney's point about having buy-in from your partner is super essential. Certainly I had a lot of like moral support from my spouse, but I did want to like acknowledge that there might be people listening who maybe don't have a super present partner, or my partner was like emotionally present maybe, but he had a very unpredictable work schedule and would travel a lot for work. And so I didn't necessarily feel that I could always count on having this other person. I ended up like setting up some alternative childcare options for like emergencies, times that I would typically maybe reach out to my partner, but I like couldn't count on the fact that he would be available. So if you're someone who feels like maybe you have to be a little more independent in handling this, I just want to encourage you, like, that's okay. Like there are ways to tackle this and strategize and still be successful. But yeah, if you do have a partner, I think having that buy-in is super essential.
Yeah, I think everyone sort of covered a lot of the base, but when I was having my conversation with my partner, I think I forgot to kind of think thoroughly about emergencies when like my child is sick or the daycare is closed for some reason, because it was like kind of at the tail end of COVID maybe during my cohort. And so, in the past when I was working remotely, I was always thinking like, oh, we'll figure it out, we'll take it day by day. But I think with Capstone, because it's so mentally involved and you're with other groups, I think just kind of thinking about just having a little bit of a thought process behind, okay, what will happen when someone is sick or when you don't have, your typical childcare to kind of depend on. I think, I do think that's very important to think about going in.
Yeah.
Nice. Thank
And
you,
this
everyone.
this sort of
Sorry, go ahead.
dovetails with a question in the chat, which is, how did you deal with disruption in your schedule, or even having to maybe miss a day if that ever happened? We've talked a lot about the best case scenario, but did anybody have issues where maybe they had to step away or not work on Capstone stuff because they had sort of a childcare emergency going on?
I did. So I told you that my wife was pregnant during Capstone. So one of the peak moments of Capstone, in my opinion, in terms of activity and maybe like emotional energy, might be the write-up phase. At least it was for me, right? And when we're working on our write-up, my daughter Bethany decided it's time, right? And so she was born the weekend we were gonna start on the write-up. And so my whole team was very understanding. They're like, here, just take a few days. They were even like, we'll cover the write-up. You take the week. And so she was born over the weekend. So I took some moments, spent some time at the hospital. We had lots of fun, didn't just kind of took a moment of pause, right? But like when I came back to the project, there were certain things that I knew well that other people did not, and so that part of the write-up still needed like some help, and so like came back to it and picked up where we left off. But I remember it did delay us like a few days, and so I tried to like make up for it by like putting in a little bit more energy. But the reality was like things like that just happen. Like sometimes your team goes at a schedule that's different from other people. Life happens, not just to parents. And that's the other thing. Like now that I'm Capstone mentoring, I see that like life for us centers on kids often, like life happening. And sometimes we feel guilty because, oh no, like we're affecting the group. But everybody is facing life during Capstone, and life just happens in different ways for different people. And so you work with it.
I think second week of Capstone, like entire class of my son's daycare got COVID. And so like, it was closed up. We had to have him home. And so during that time, I remember just not being able to, like Miles said, I had to walk away a lot from, though I didn't feel comfortable, I fully understood something. And so what's COVID? I think like those things will happen. And then, later in the later weeks, every once in a while, somebody in my group would get sick and they would have to take time off too. And so it's not just us parents, life happens to everyone. And so I think, yeah, there will be times where you may need to walk away. And, like Ronnie mentioned, it's part of the sort of things that we need to let go sometimes. But you can also always kind of find ways to make the time worthwhile, like when you are able to come back and dedicate more time.
Nice, thank you. We had a couple of folks ask about a different aspect of this, more on the financial side. So wanted just to find out from all of you, like, how did you prepare for kind of the financial obligations that, you know, comes with going through Capstone? You know, maybe childcare arrangements that you had needed to make, things like that.
I think to be like totally transparent, I think that the expense of the childcare for both of my kids, plus some supplemental childcare to help me with like afternoon pickups, it wouldn't have been sustainable, right? If I wasn't going to be getting a well-paying job at the end of this, right? I couldn't have just kept on like that forever. But we did save, and I think in my case, it was a little different because it wasn't like I had some well-paying job ahead of time that then I left and there was a big change in our finances. The major change was adding that expensive childcare, but we weren't really like losing my income because I had been with my kids mostly full-time. So someone who maybe had to leave their full-time job and lose that income probably has some good insight there.
I like for us, when I was going through core, like I mentioned that we moved to Puerto Rico, and that was very strategic because we ended up renting from my grandmother-in-law's house, and the rent was just much more manageable. We had grandparents around, and it was like to help also with child care. And so other than that, like those were some strategic like choices. Let's see, we like had, and then we did save up a little bit, and like Elizabeth said, we like this was during COVID, and they were sending out like the COVID checks. I didn't even realize at the time that they were actually helpful for us, but also we had some money saved up, so it was like a combination of factors that came together, and so it became a blessing for us. So that's about it.
If you live in a high cost of living area and you're losing half the income, you can still do Capstone. Because I feel like I live very close to Manhattan, and I had an income, and I also was sort of the healthcare provider for my family. And so when I decided to quit, you know, my family was letting go of a lot. But like Elizabeth said, we did kind of prepare for it going in. You know, you're doing launch school, you know, minimum a year, I would say. And so you have that time to kind of really start budgeting and planning for what comes afterwards. And we did do that. And we also very much budgeted throughout the whole thing, because we weren't spending as much as we had in the past. We were very mindful of of our cash flow. And so, yeah, we had to make adjustments for sure. But you know, this is a very deliberate thing that we are doing. You know, you're making a life transition for something that's going to really benefit your family, you know, once this short phase is done. And so I would say that planning is, you know, very worth it. And the sacrifices you make during that short period of time, I personally think it was very much worth it for our family as well. And so, yeah, there are things you can do to plan for it.
And in terms of like, this is more specific, but in terms of like childcare arrangement, would you recommend budgeting for like 6 to 8 months? Does that seem like a reasonable time frame?
Yes, absolutely. I would say minimum 6 months, but probably to give a little more cushion, you know, like 8 to 10 months would help you feel a little bit more comfortable.
Yeah, because the Capstone program is 17 weeks, so that's about 4 months, right? And then the typical job search is usually 2 to 3 months, so 8 to 12 weeks. So that puts you in the 7th month range. So I think that's
Yes.
Another question. So where would everybody typically do their work? You know, were there any ways that you needed to kind of minimize distractions if there are other people working from home or just a lot of activity going on in the house?
Yes, to minimizing the distractions. I mean, I feel like you have core ahead of you, and so like Rodney's kind of said earlier, like launch school tricks you, you get all these habits, like you know, that stuff translated right into Capstone. I feel like decently easy. I mean, some early stories of like working on something and my son toddling by is like, oh, what's this big green button on that box? And then so learned some of those lessons like before Capstone. But yeah, I'm in the same glorious space right now as I was in core and Capstone and now working. So it's been super helpful to have like this extra kind of smaller space to stay away. But I feel like it wasn't really that much different from core for me, like my working kind of arrangements.
I've always had like some type of little room that I've used as an office. And when my kids were younger, I think until the youngest was 4, I strategically would have some type of TV in the room just in case someone was homesick and I had to study. I would just pop them next to me in front of the TV and we would have a little extra screen time that day. I think my Capstone teammates like saw a lot of my, 4-year-old watching dinosaurs in the background when he was sick. Yeah, and noise canceling headphones. I use them now sometimes when my family's too loud and I'm just like cooking dinner. Pop those babies on. Great.
Yeah, I think for me it was quiet space. Just because at least I don't know about everyone else, but for me, I knew like if like I would go into my bedroom or our bedroom and that there was like little corner. This is where change was happening. This was my lab. But basically finding that space was helpful. And then knowing, just basically getting into the habit with your kids to basically be like, all right, you can come in now, and letting them have times where it's like, you can come in, we can hang out, whatever. And then now I need to focus, and like having them learn to like respect both. It was helpful for both sides. That for them, it was easier to be like, oh yeah, Papa's doing something right now. So shh, okay, go back. And it's like, all right, come now, you can go on my chair and we'll swivel. And so those things were helpful, at least for me.
Eventually
There's
they get old
the
enough they
opposite.
don't want to bother you. Eventually my 8-year-old now, I'm like, come to my office after school and tell me how your day was, and he will not come up here. So it goes the other way. They hit some sort of pivot and then they don't want to bother you in your office. They just want to do their own thing.
No, it's like a moth. My 8-year-old is the difference. She'll see like the screen in here and she'll be like just trying to like just barely in the screen so that the people on the call will notice and like say it's like this game. I'm like, everybody's cool with it though. I feel like there's been enough like remote work and yeah, like life is happening, and if you're with real people, then it's all good.
I've definitely never had my 2-year-old video bomb my screen when I'm giving system design lectures to like 30 students. So I think we got a good question here about like transitioning into a career in development. So, if you transitioned into a career in web dev after Capstone from another career, right? Were there any changes about working life you think were kind of significant or important enough to share, like being a parent as like with a job in software engineering versus like a past career?
For me, so my previous career was as a teacher. And to me, typically if I try to do something, I want to give 100% to it. But teaching has this habit of like basically at times I would have to leave my house very early, sometimes 5 a.m. lesson plan and things like that, and then get to teaching all day. And then I would come home and we had after school activities. I would come home by like 5, right? And then my kids were typically in bed by like 7 or something. And like I basically was so tired that I'm like ready to just nap, right? And so one of the things that I didn't want, I realized I was like, I'm raising other people's kids. And I specifically wanted to transition because I wanted to have better control of my own schedule, to be able to step away, and it's okay. So that's why I targeted remote work, and that was one of the appeals of software engineering. And so for me, it's the value of I can step away and I can go hang out. I can go teach. We homeschool our kids, so I can go teach one of the classes to our kids. So that has been a positive change in terms of career transition that I would very much push if anybody is looking for that, but I think you can get that.
I think there's also some things that you can control somewhat during your job hunt. Like when you're looking at 100% remote work versus, in-person work or hybrid work, and how that works with your schedule, with your family. And, when you're interviewing, you really do get a sense of the culture, to a degree. And so if having a certain accommodating environment is important to you, I think that's something that you can really look out for during your interviews, during the job hunt.
I've noticed that, Rodney, I feel like you talked a little bit about, but with engineering work, in contrast to like prior work, which was kind of in business, it's much more like brain intensive. And some sprints, like you're just going along, like you're knocking out your tickets, you kind of have good like domain knowledge, and all right, like things are just kind of rolling along. And then other sprints is, maybe I'm ramping up on like a new or service or some part of the service that I haven't really worked in. And I've noticed that during those times, it reminds me of like the first few weeks of Capstone, when it was just lecture, like sleep, lecture, sleep. And it's really kind of brain intensive. And so I've noticed the ups and downs kind of continue with my level of energy based on that like brain drain, if you will, during that sprint or whatever. But it's nice that it's cyclical, at least so far for me, that it's not just like all on.
Yeah, if you're someone going through core right now who feels like some weeks you just get everything, oh, I was meant for this, and other weeks you struggle and you have all this self-doubt, it never ends. Like at work, sometimes I'm like, yeah, I'm crushing it. There's nothing I can't do. And then some days you just feel like, wow, can I do anything right? Or, I should be able to do this easily. And why does it feel so hard? So I honestly encourage you to maybe just lean into those ups and downs. We'll probably all have them with parenting as well. Sometimes you feel like, well, we all slept 6 hours last night, killing it. And then it all goes off the rails. Yeah, so just lean in and just know everything's going to be like natural ups and downs. But in the long run, right, the trajectory of your learning and your career is going up, and you'll have a lot to be proud of.
Yeah, so we're approaching the end of our time today already. So just to wrap up, are there any perspectives or advice that anybody would like to share that we haven't had a chance to cover today?
I don't have any additional advice, but I think for me, it was going into Capstone, I felt a lot of fear, anxiety about this. And so if anyone has any question, you can always, you can find me in the Slack Launch School Slack. I think my handle is @URM. So feel free to DM me with any questions. I'm happy to answer.
Yeah, similarly, I would just say, like, don't self-reject, don't hold yourself back. Like, I almost didn't do Capstone just because I thought, like, well, it'll probably be really hard for me and my, family responsibilities or whatever, but don't self-reject, don't hold yourself back just because of self-doubt, right? Find your supporters and your people who can cheer you on and help you strategize, and you can be successful.
Oh, I need to do a shout out for Elizabeth, because when I was starting Capstone, I emailed her and asked her a bunch of questions and she was like, you can do it. So thanks, Elizabeth.
I'm happy to be anyone's cheerleader. Reach out.
I think I have one last perspective. I think we touched on it a little bit. I mentioned one of the great struggles I feel in Capstone is like setting that boundary of, this is what is essential, these are the non-essentials. I think the second major struggle is on the team side, and coming to accept that if I did not have kids, I would probably be able to do more than I am able to do. And that is okay, that I'm going to contribute. It's not even that comparing yourself to others is the biggest thing. It's the fact that you yourself feel like, man, I can't do this, that, or the other, or whatever. And so coming to accept that having kids is a great strength, and you will not be able to maybe do as much as you could if you didn't have kids, and that's okay. And that will actually show strengths that other people may not have because of the experiences you've had with your kids. And so I think accepting those two things can kind of emotionally help throughout all of Capstone. So.
Anything phenomenal to add? I just I really resonate with some of the sentiments that people have shared, with like knowing your limits and accepting that there are limits. Like, you're just not going to be able to know that transition from mastery-based learning to just-in-time learning. Like, it just is, and it continues on. And so just accepting and being really grateful for the time, the day, and just accept it and keep rolling.
Awesome. Well, thank you, everyone. Really great stuff today. I want to acknowledge we didn't answer every question. We weren't able to get to every question. And we actively tried to prioritize the questions that were revolved around Capstone and parenting. But if you do have any questions, feel free and DM Max or I. I'm Nick Miller, Max Hawkins. Hey there. You can also reach out to us at capstone@launchschool.com via email. And yeah, we're jazzed to talk about anything and everything Capstone. So hope to talk to you all. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah.
Thanks.